The story starts with the student council president and vice president walking around the school's hallway, and some students watch them, and they think that they are really cool. They wonder if the two of them are dating, and they think that they would make a great couple. The student council president named Suzune Inukami then mentions that the moment has come for them to amend the school's regulations, and the vice president Kazuki Ryusen states that he has all the documents that they are going to need to make a compelling argument. We then see a student named Ken Usato, and he mentions that some people are always at the center of attention, but he is the opposite of that, and he is just a simple forgettable high school student. He thinks that nothing out of the ordinary happens to him, but in his heart, he always hopes for an extraordinary and fantastical life. One day while it's raining, Ken notices that someone has taken his umbrella, and he waits for the rain to stop, but the rain doesn't stop, and it keeps getting worse. Suzune then comes there, and she wonders if Ken doesn't have an umbrella. Ken states that he doesn't, and Suzune mentions that all of the students are required to leave soon. Ken states that he will head home just like this, but Suzune stops him, as he might get sick if he gets wet in this rain. Kazuki then comes there, and he mentions that he will lend Ken his spare umbrella. Ken is surprised to see that Kazuki knows his name, and Kazuki gives him his spare umbrella. He states that they should head home together, and Ken can't believe that he is going to walk home with the most popular students in school. They then head home, and while on the way Ken mentions that he didn't expect Kazuki to be this friendly, as he only talks to girls in their class. Kazuki mentions that it's because they start conversations with him, and Suzune thinks that this means that the other boys don't like talking to Kazuki. Kazuki asks her to not tease him, and Ken mentions that he thought that Suzune was even less approachable. Suzune mentions that she is an ordinary high school third year, and Kazuki states that she is not ordinary. He mentions that she is at the top of her class, and she is also great in sports. On top of that, she is beautiful inside and out, and Suzune mentions that Kazuki is being awfully hard at her. Kazuki states that he is just getting back at her, and Ken then asks them if the two of them are dating. This question surprises the both of them, and they mention that they are not dating. Suzune states that they only spend so much time together because of their student council work, and they know that a lot of people think that the two of them are dating, but Ken is the first person to ask them directly. Ken apologizes, and Suzune mentions that this was a compliment, as it's better than talking about it behind their backs. Suzune then asks Ken if he has thought what he is going to do after high school, and Ken mentions that he has no plans about it. Kazuki states that Suzune asked him the same question earlier, and Suzune mentions that she is just curious about other people's answers, as she also doesn't have any plans of her own. She mentions that she doesn't know what she wants to do in life, and sometimes she feels like she doesn't belong in this world. Suzune and Kazuki then hear sounds of some bells ringing, but Ken can't hear anything. Suzune and Kazuki state that the sounds are getting louder, and a magic circle then appears below the three of them. Ken wonders if this is a gate to another world, and hearing this Suzune gets excited, and she asks Ken if they are going to find magic, heroes, and monsters in this other world. Ken wonders if Suzune likes these kinds of things, and the three of them get teleported. The scene then cuts to Ken waking up, and he asks Kazuki where they are, and who is in front of them. Kazuki mentions that he doesn't know as he also woke up just now, and Ken then notices that Suzune is totally excited to be here. Kazuki then asks the people in front of him who they are, and what they have done to them, and the king in front of them states that he can understand their confusion, and he introduces himself as Lloyd Volgast, King of Linger. He states that he summoned them here to serve as heroes, and Suzune is excited to hear this, and Ken hopes that she stops ruining his perfect image of her. The king then explains that 2 years ago they were attacked by the king of demons, and he invaded their nation with an army. They managed to drive them off, but the demon lord's army has been expanding its power. There is no telling what will happen next time, so as a last resort they used a forbidden ritual to summon accomplished individuals from another world. Kazuki is surprised to hear this, and he gets angry at the king for summoning them without their consent. He asks him to send them back this instant, and the king tells him that this is not possible, as the hero summoning only works in one direction. Kazuki wonders what's going to happen to them now, and he states that the three of them have families back home. The king apologizes to them, and he mentions that they are desperate. Kazuki tries to get aggressive, but the guards stop him, and Ken tells him that they appreciate him getting angry on their behalf, but there is no point in starting a fight. Kazuki understands, and the king and everyone else in the court then bow to the three summoned heroes, and the king promises to find a way to send them back in the future. He begs them to help his kingdom until then, and Suzune asks the king why he calls them heroes, when he doesn't know anything about them. The king tells Welsi the mage to explain this to them, and Welsi states that the hero summoning magic circle is designed to select accomplished individuals. She mentions that they must have heard bells ringing when they were summoned, and she states that this indicates that they are heroes. Kazuki and Suzune then remember that Ken didn't hear those bells, and they find out that Ken was just dragged in with them by mistake. The scene then cuts to Welsi telling the heroes that now she is going to use this crystal ball to check their magical abilities, and while she prepares it, Kazuki asks Ken if he is okay with this. Ken states that he is fine, and he mentions that Welsi told him that he will be able to use magic, even though he is not a hero, and he is glad that they are treating him the same as them. Kazuki states that he is not talking about that, and he wonders if Ken is not angry at them for summoning him to an unknown place. Ken states that getting angry won't change anything, and he thinks that it would be better for him to find something that he can do here. Kazuki thinks that Ken is amazing, and Ken mentions that Suzune is more impressive than him as she is really positive about all this. Welsi then finishes preparing the magic ball, and after putting her hand on it, Suzune finds out that she has an affinity for thunder magic, and she also has ample mana. We then find out that Kazuki has an affinity for light magic, and Welsi is impressed to see this. Kazuki wonders what he can do with this, and Welsi mentions that light magic is amazing as only a few people are able to use it, and when fighting demons it's unparalleled. Ken then puts his hand on the ball, and the ball glows green. Welsi is surprised to see this color, and she drags Ken with him saying that she needs to tell him about this. The scene cuts to Welsi telling the king that the heroes have incredible magic abilities, but the ball turned green when Ken touched it. The king and his guards are surprised to hear this, and the king states that they need to get Ken away from the castle as quickly as possible. He wonders what would be the safest place for him, and hearing this Ken wonders if he is dangerous. He wonders if no one else has the same affinity as him, and the king states that there is someone, but he has a horrible expression on his face. A woman named Rose then comes there, and she wonders how the summoning ritual went. The king wonders why she had to show up right now, and he states that Rose was supposed to take the day off today. Rose then notices Ken, and she wonders if he is one of the heroes. The king states that he is not, and he mentions that Ken was brought here accidentally. He is just an ordinary boy, and Rose then introduces herself to Ken, and Ken does the same. Rose mentions that she is the captain of the kingdom's rescue team, and Ken thinks that she looks like someone who takes lives rather than saving them. Welsi tells Rose that the heroes are in the crystal ballroom, and she tries to take Rose there. The king then states that he will decide what to do with Ken later, and he tells him to rest in the room they have prepared for him. Ken mentions that they still haven't told him, what kind of magic is that green color, and Rose hears this. She then tells the king that she is going to borrow this boy, and the king asks Welsi to get Ken away from her, and Welsi uses her magic to get Ken out of there. Rose chases after him, and she manages to catch him. She tells the king that she is going to turn this boy into a full-fledged healing magic user, and she leaves with Ken, even though the king tries to stop her. Welsi then informs Kazuki and Suzune about this, and Kazuki wonders if Ken is in any danger. Welsi tells him that Ken is not going to get killed, and he was only taken to the rescue team beyond the castle town. She explains that the crystal ball indicated that Ken had an affinity for healing magic, and she mentions that healing mages are quite rare. Rose is one of them, and she intends to train Ken as her subordinate. Suzune thinks that there seems to be no problem with this, and Welsi mentions that the problem is that Rose has some unorthodox teaching methods, and the subordinates she produces are weird. The scene then cuts to Ken at the rescue team lodgings, and he finds out that he is a healing magic user. Rose states that this is why she has brought Ken here, and she mentions that this is going to be his home from now on. Rose then calls her subordinates, and they all come running. Ken gets scared to see her burly subordinates, and Rose asks them to look after Ken. Her subordinates then introduce themselves as Good, Gomel, Alec, Mill, and Tong. Rose then kicks Tong, and she asks them to not scare the newbie. She tells Ken that these are her subordinates, but they are not healing magic users. She mentions that there are 2 other healing magic users on the rescue team, but normally they work elsewhere. She states that she is going to drum into Ken how to use healing magic, and Ken thinks that every fiber of his being is telling him to not get involved with her. He tries to refuse her offer, but she doesn't listen to him, and she asks him to share a room with Tong. She then leaves, and her subordinates mentions that Ken is screwed if he is going to be trained by Rose herself. At night while everyone sleeps, Ken wonders what's going to happen to him, and he goes to sleep, and meanwhile Rose wonders how a healing magic user from another world is going to turn out. The scene then cuts to Ken waking up, and he thinks that he was hoping for everything to be a dream, but he really is in another world. Alec tells him that they have some guests, and Ken notices that it's his friends, and he talks with them. Kazuki states that they were worried about Ken when they heard that he had been abducted, and Ken apologizes for making the two of them worried. He states that he is alive for now, but he is supposed to start the training from hell today, and he doesn't know how tomorrow is going to be. Kazuki wonders if it's really so bad, and Ken mentions that he doesn't know. Kazuki states that it seems like Ken wants to go through with it, and Ken mentions that he has nothing better to do, and if possible, he would like to be of some use. Suzune states that this is what she expected from Ken, and she mentions that they should all do their best. Ken wonders what kind of training they will get to do, and Kazuki tells Ken that thanks to him, he has made up his mind, and he mentions that he is going to do his best in this world. Suzune states that she will also do her best, and the two of them then leave. Ken hopes that he can grow strong enough to support the two of them, and Rose then comes there. She wonders if Ken enjoyed his chat with the heroes, and Ken states that he did, and he thanks Rose for this. Rose tells him that this is not a prison, and Ken is free to see whoever he wants, but only when he is not training. Ken understands, and Rose then gives him a journal, and she asks him to keep a record of his daily training and how he feels about it in this. She mentions that they will get started after breakfast, and Ken wonders what kind of training he will be doing. We then see Ken's first day of training, and he thinks that this is easier than expected. We see that he is learning to feel his mana, and he states that he can feel some kind of warmth in his chest. Rose tells him that this is his mana, and next they will be working on how to draw it out. Afterwards Rose asks Ken to read a book, and Ken mentions that he can't read the language of this world, but Rose still insists on it, and Ken notices that he can read it. Rose states that summoned heroes already have translation magic cast on them, and she explains the geography of this world to Ken. Ken finds out that the demon territory and Linger Kingdom are right next to each other, and Rose tells him that this is why the kingdom is the first target of the demons. She asks Ken to read this book, as it has the basic information about nations, different races, and demons of this world. Ken reads the book, and he thinks that he will be able to handle his training if this is what it's like. Ken then mentions that on day 2 he ran a lot, and he thought that this is different from the magic training that he expected. On day 3 Ken is forced to run until his muscles are so sore that he can't go on. When he falls, Rose asks him why he stopped, as she never told him to do this, and Ken tries to explain that he can't go on, but Rose heals him with a slap, and she asks him to continue running. Ken gets scared, and he runs as fast as he can. On day 4 Ken starts training with the other members, and we notice that all of them are faster than Ken, and Ken is a lap behind them. They all talk down to him, and Ken thinks that he wants to talk back to them, but he decides to write this in his journal instead. On day 5 he runs all day again, and on day 6 it's raining, and while running Ken slips and falls on the ground. Rose asks him to keep going, and Ken thinks that he is going to write about how cold Rose is in his journal. Ken then notices the light of healing magic coming from his hand, but the light subsides when Ken thinks that he doesn't need it right now. On day 7 Ken runs until he is about to die, and he then gets his ass kicked. Rose tells him that he is pissing her off, so she is going to raise the difficulty, and she tells him to continue the training. Ken thinks that he is going to call her a muscle-bound gorilla in his journal, and on day 8 he gets his ass kicked by Rose again. The same thing happens on day 9, and he stops questioning the need of the healing light. He uses it to heal himself, and he notices that his entire body is as good as new. He thinks that healing magic is great, and he continues running. On day 10 Ken runs some more, and he thinks that now that he can use healing magic, he doesn't get tired, no matter how much he runs, but he is not sure if he can help his friends by just running. He thinks that Rose is going to hit him if he voices his concerns, and Rose then asks him to do 30 more laps. Ken thinks that for now, he just has to finish his training, and afterwards he will deal with Rose. On day 11, there is a new addition to the training, and now Ken does push-ups along with running. Rose asks him if he knows why he is training like this, and she mentions that it's so he can run away from an enemy as quickly as possible. It's also so he can save his injured allies, as the faster he runs, the faster he will be able to save them. Ken understands, and he continues training. On day 12, Ken runs until the afternoon, and he does push-ups in the evening. He thinks that his body is starting to feel light now, and on day 13 Rose catches on to this, and she adds weights to his body. On day 14, Ken's lunch goes missing, and Ken asks the others if they have seen his boxed lunch. Tong tells him that he ate it, as he thought that somebody didn't want it and left it here. This makes Ken mad, and he picks a fight with Tong. Tong runs away, and Ken chases after him. A week then passes by, and on day 21, Kazuki and Suzune come to visit Ken once more. We see that a knight and a princess is also with them, and Mill takes them to the place where Ken is training. They notice Ken doing push-ups while lifting Rose in a stone block, and Rose tells him to stop whining about this. Ken then clicks his tongue, and Rose gets angry at this, but Ken mentions that he is doing this because Rose is too light. Kazuki and the others are surprised to see this, and Rose then puts another stone block on Ken, but Ken still continues his push-ups, and Rose thinks that Ken is starting to become her kind of man. She states that she will be able to take him out there sooner than expected, and Ken's friends are surprised to see how much Ken has changed. Suzune thinks that he has built some amazing muscles, and the knight named Siglis gets mad at Rose seeing this, and he mentions that she is destroying a man with a bright future. Rose tells him that she has her own way of doing things, and she asks him to keep his knightly ideals to himself. She tells him that Ken is going to be her right-hand man, and it will be a problem if he can't handle this much. Ken is surprised to hear this, and Rose states that Ken is a real find. He can't stand to lose, and he never gives up, and on top of this he has been able to survive her training. Ken thinks that he did all this to show her a thing or two, but it seems to have backfired on him. Rose then tells Ken to take a break and get some lunch, and she states that she is sure that he wants to catch up with the heroes. Ken understands, and Siglis asks Kazuki and Suzune to take care of the princess, as he needs to talk further with Rose. They leave hearing this, and Siglis mentions that he knew Rose was a deviant, and he states that he was told to enlist her back, but he can't do that. Rose mentions that she doesn't want this anyways, as her right eye is useless. Ken then finds out that Siglis commands the army of Linger Kingdom, and he is the strongest knight in the kingdom. He is teaching sword fighting to Kazuki and Suzune, and Ken thinks that it's awesome, and he wonders who this young lady is. The lady introduces herself as Celia Vulgast Linger, and Ken finds out that she is the princess of this kingdom, and he bows to her. Celia tells him that he doesn't need to be formal with her, and Suzune states that Ken is acting just like Kazuki did in the beginning. Kazuki asks her to not talk about this, and all of them then enjoy some tart that the princess brought. Kazuki then asks Ken if he undergoes training like that every day, and Ken mentions that he does, and he wonders how things are at their end. Kazuki tells him that their training is also difficult, but Siglis and Welsi always consider their health and well-being while training them. Ken thinks that this is how it is supposed to be, and he mentions that Rose is really brutal. Kazuki tries to say something else, but Suzune notices Ken's muscles, and she goes to take a close look. She thinks that they are amazing, and she wonders if she can touch them. Ken asks her to hold on, and he wonders what Kazuki was trying to say. Kazuki asks Ken if this is not difficult for him, and Ken mentions that it's crazy tough, and he wanted to run away at first, but he doesn't want to do that anymore, as training is getting fun. Hearing this, Suzune thinks that Ken is amazing, as he has already found his place here, and Ken mentions that he is just stubborn, and he wants to help the two of them when they fight as heroes someday. Suzune wonders if she can count on him to save her if she is in trouble, and Ken asks her to not pretend to be a normal girl. Suzune states that she is just a normal girl, but even Celia agrees with Ken on this. Tom then comes to deliver Ken's lunch to him, but Ken is still angry at him about earlier, and the two of them start to fight. The princess wonders if they should stop them, and Kazuki mentions that it's fine, as this must be a part of Ken's daily life. He states that he is feeling a bit restless now, and he goes back to the castle to train. The others go with him, and before leaving, Suzune thinks that there must be a reason why the three of them were summoned here together, and she thinks that they should do their best. The scene then cuts to Ken taking a bath, and he thinks that it was great to see his friends again. He thinks that Suzune's behavior did freak him out, but she was right, and his body has really changed. He thinks this is the result of him healing his damaged muscles over and over, and he remembers that he has to run to save the injured on the battlefield. He wonders if someone like him has the mental fortitude to do this, and the next day after breakfast Rose tells Ken that they are going out today. Hearing this, the others think that it's already time for that, and the scene cuts to Rose taking Ken out of the capital. They then walk somewhere, and Ken asks her where they are going. Rose tells him to just follow her, and they arrive at a forest. Rose tells Ken that this forest is known as the Darkness of Linger, and it's infamously teeming with monsters. She asks Ken to go inside, and not come back until he hunts down a grand grizzly, and Ken tells her that blue grizzlies only turn into grand grizzlies after living for a century. The book said that even blue grizzlies are dangerous, and Rose mentions that he should be able to take one down easily. Ken tells her that he doesn't even know how to fight, but Rose just throws him into the forest. Up in the air, Ken thinks that he is going to die at this rate, and he uses his healing magic on himself. The trees also cushion his fall, and he manages to land on the ground safely. He then heals himself, and he thinks that he can't go back unless he does what Rose has ordered him to. He is determined to take down a grand grizzly, and he thinks that it shouldn't be a big deal, as it's just a 2-meter tall bear. A grand grizzly then comes there, and Ken runs at sight. While running, he thinks that it's bigger than he thought, and its claws and fangs are huge. He thinks that he has confidence in his legs, and the grizzly can't match his speed, but he notices that the grizzly is right behind him. He wonders what he should do, and he thinks that this guy is nothing compared to Rose. He tries to take it on one-on-one, but he notices that there are a pair of blue grizzlies with him. Ken starts running once more, and he jumps onto a waterfall to stop the bears from chasing him. He then goes out of the water, and we see him drying his clothes upon some trees. He notices that he has emergency rations, a canteen, and a knife with him, and he thinks that Rose should have given him something to start a fire with. He thinks that she is a demon, and he eats some of his emergency rations. He thinks that he has to take down a grand grizzly, but that seems like an impossible task. He then decides to think about this some other time, and he states that for now, he has survived his first day. The next day Ken goes out scouting in the forest, and he thinks that for now he has to learn more about his enemy. First, he needs to find where the grand grizzly lives, and after scouting for a while he comes across some scratch marks. He hears the rustling of leaves, and he wonders if the grizzly is nearby. He notices that it's just a black rabbit, and he finds out that it's injured. Ken asks it if it's hurt, and the rabbit nods, and he wonders if it understands him. He then heals the rabbit, and he asks it to try not to get hurt again. Afterwards he continues his scouting, and he notices the rabbit following him around. He asks the rabbit to leave him alone, as he is looking for some dangerous monsters right now, but the rabbit still follows him. Ken asks it to not follow him again, and he wonders if the rabbit knows where the grand grizzly lives. Hearing this, the rabbit goes ahead, and he signals Ken to follow him. Ken does so, and the rabbit leads him to the grand grizzly's den. Ken thinks that now he has to monitor them without being discovered, and he thinks that they seem like a family. He read that grand grizzlies live in groups, and this is what they must be talking about. The next day Ken collects some river water, and he thinks that he is a little worried about drinking water that's not been boiled, but he has no other choice. The rabbit comes back to him, and Ken thinks that he didn't expect the rabbit to come back, and he tells it that he is just going to monitor the grizzlies again. Afterwards Ken monitors the grizzlies, and he thinks that the blue ones are starting to feel kind of cute. He thinks that the black rabbit is also cute, and he is living a pretty happy life right now. The day after that Ken gets a bad case of stomachache due to the water he drank yesterday, and he notices that even his healing magic isn't working quickly on this. He thinks that it must be because he was basically poisoned, and he wonders if there is a way to fix this. The rabbit comes back again, and Ken tells it that he is glad to see him. The scene then cuts to the rabbit showing a clear water lake to Ken, and Ken realizes that the rabbit is telling him that this water is safe to drink. He drinks the water, and he thinks that it's delicious. He then notices the rabbit shaking, and he wonders what's up. The rabbit then climbs atop a tree, and he signals Ken to follow him. Ken gets up there as well, and he wonders if a monster is coming towards them. He thinks that this rabbit wasn't even this scared of the grand grizzly, and he wonders what kind of monster it is. He then notices a giant white snake, and he wonders what that thing is. He thinks that he hasn't read about anything like that, but he can still tell that it's dangerous, and bloodlust is oozing out of every inch of it. He thinks that he has to steer clear of that, and 4 days after seeing the giant snake he still continues monitoring the grizzlies. He thinks that these guys are the same as ever, and watching them warms his heart, but he can't go home without defeating that Grand Grizzly. He decides to challenge the Grand Grizzly the next day, and the next day he tries to leave to slay the grizzly, but the rabbit stops him. Seeing him try so hard, Ken decides to stay until the rain stops, and after it stops Ken goes to fight the Grand Grizzly. The rabbit goes with him, and Ken steals his resolve to fight, but he notices that both the Grand and the Blue Grizzly is dead. He wonders what happened here, and he thinks that Rose is going to kill him if she finds out that he let someone steal his prey. He notices the bite marks on the bodies of the grizzlies, and he thinks that it must be the giant snake. He notices that the snake wasn't killing to eat, it was just killing for the fun of it, and he finds out that the little blue grizzly has survived the attack, as it was hiding. It tries to wake up its mother and father, and Ken thinks that he hates to lose. This is why he doesn't like losing to Rose, and he also doesn't like the fact that his prey was stolen from him, and he steeled his nerves for nothing. The little blue grizzly then starts to cry at the death of its parents, and Ken thinks that what he hates the most is the thing he is seeing right now. He asks the little blue grizzly to wait here, as he is going to get revenge for him, but the blue grizzly tracks the snake's scent. Meanwhile, Kazuki and Suzune go to check on Ken, but they find out that he has been training in the forest for 10 days. Kazuki states that 10 days is a bit long, and Tong tells him that Rose is the one who decides everything here, and they can't do anything about this. Alex states that Rose is also gone, and they don't know what's going on. Afterwards the two of them return, and on the way, Suzune states that Kazuki gets awfully worked up when it comes to Ken. Kazuki wonders if Suzune isn't worried about him, and Suzune states that she is worried, but Rose is the one making him do this, so it's probably fine. She states that she believes in Ken, and she is sure that he is going to come back hale and hearty. Kazuki mentions that he believes in him as well, and we then see Ken preparing to fight the giant snake. He makes himself a weapon, and he eats some food. Afterwards he does some stretches, and he asks the rabbit to take him to the snake. He tells it to run away after showing him the way, and the rabbit takes him to the snake by following its scent. Once there, Ken notices that the little blue grizzly is fighting the snake, and it's heavily injured. He thinks that he knew this thing was dangerous, and it's plain terrifying, but nothing is scarier than Rose. He then launches a surprise attack on the snake, and he manages to stab its eye. The snake pushes him aside using its tail, and Ken heals himself, and he prepares for another attack. He thinks that he should attack the snake from its blind side, and he tries to do that, but the snake manages to bite his arm. Ken realizes that the snake baited him to attack on its blind side, and he heals himself, and he uses the knife in his hand to stab the inside of the snake's mouth. The snake then lets him go, and Ken finds out that he has been poisoned. He thinks that it's not fair that the snake is both big and poisonous, but he mentions that now he knows how to heal himself when he has been poisoned. He thinks that it's thanks to the stomachache that he got earlier, and he just has to heal from the inside when he has been poisoned. He then continues his fight, and the snake tries to attack him with its tail, but the blue grizzly stops its tail. Ken uses this chance to get atop the snake, and he punches it with all his might. He then sticks the spear logged into the snake's eye deeper, and the snake stops moving after agonizing in pain for a while. Ken thinks that he finally managed to defeat the snake, and the blue grizzly comes to him. Ken notices that it has grown fond of him, and he tells it that he got revenge for it. He mentions that he wants to heal the grizzly's wound, but he has used up all of his mana to neutralize the snake's venom. He states that he can't move anymore, and he notices that the snake is still alive. He tries to get up, but it's no use, and the blue grizzly tries to drag him away, but it's not strong enough. Ken asks the blue grizzly to just leave him here, and the snake tries to attack Ken. Ken thinks that this is it, and he thinks that this entire thing is Rose's fault. He yells loudly that this is all because of Rose, and he calls her a brute, a violent woman, and an ogre. Rose then jumps on the snake from above, and she kicks it to death. She states that the snake should have died quietly, and seeing her Ken asks her why she is here. Rose mentions that the little one filled her in, and we see that the black rabbit is with her. Rose introduces the rabbit as Kukuru, and she mentions that it's her pet, and she asked it to watch over Ken. Ken mentions that it showed up injured, and Rose tells him that it just put on an act to gain his trust. She states that she was always near him, ready to step in if something happened, but she planned to intervene as less as possible. She didn't think that this thing would appear here, and Ken wonders if Rose knows what this thing is. Rose tells him that it's a monster created by the Demon Lord's army, and Sigley's failed to finish it off during the last invasion. It must have fled into the forest, but she didn't expect it to kill that Grand Grizzly, as they are so strong that not even a full unit of elite troops can take them down. Ken can't believe that Rose wanted a novice like him to fight something like that, and Rose tells him that she never expected him to win. She only wanted him to gain experience fighting something much stronger than him, but things started to get interesting, and she let him keep going to see what would happen. Ken mentions that he almost died because of that, and the blue grizzly gets hostile towards Rose hearing this. Rose states that this guy has taken a liking to Ken, and Ken pets the grizzly to calm it down. Rose states that Ken really is like her, and she mentions that they will be taking the blue grizzly with them. She asks it to carry Ken, and the grizzly agrees to go with them. He carries Ken, and Rose carries the both of them. She asks Ken what he called her earlier, and she mentions that he won't be getting any sleep tonight. Ken understands, and they leave the forest. Afterwards, Rose tells Ken that he passed with flying colors today, and now he has the right to stand beside her in the battlefield. He still hasn't mastered the basics, but he has what it takes. He has the ability to withstand pain, physical aptitude, and a strong mental state. She mentions that the other two healers never earned that distinction, and she states that he should be proud. She mentions that they are going to make it at this rate, and Ken wonders what she means. Rose tells him that the demon army will be attacking soon, and the scene cuts to the demon lord asking Amila Vergit, the commander of the Third Army, about how the preparations to invade the Linger Kingdom is going. Amila mentions that their troops have finished preparing, and they will soon begin their advance. Meanwhile, Rose tells Ken that he is going to be in the front lines with her in the upcoming war. She mentions that they are going to be a part of the vanguard, and Ken is surprised to hear this, and he wonders about the other healers, and Tong, and the others. Rose states that they do have two other healers, but both of them have a different job, and Ken mentions that he is not sure if he can do what Rose can. Rose tells him that they still have a little time, and she asks him to steel himself before it runs out. Ken wonders if he can really do this, and the scene then cuts to the Demon Lord's castle. The Demon Lord states that he will let Amila lead their forces this time, and he mentions that despite their previous success, the Linger Kingdom managed to escape from their grasp. He states that he doesn't want her to fight to her death, but he does expect her to give her utmost effort. Amila mentions that she will do her best, and the Demon Lord tells her to leave. Amila then leaves the Demon Lord's throne room, and she meets the demon doctor named Hiraluk. He notices that Amila seems nervous, and Amila mentions that Hiraluk should not waste his time mocking others, and focus on his work. Hiraluk tells her that his work is proceeding quite smoothly, and he mentions that he has completed his newest demon-made monster prototype. He wonders if Amila wants to see it, and the scene cuts to him showing it to Amila. We notice that it looks just like the snake that Ken fought, and Hiraluk states that this is prototype 72, and it's called Baljinak. Amila mentions that he also gave the same name to prototype 71, and it went missing when they attacked Linger Kingdom the last time. Hiraluk states that it ran away after being injured by an enemy named Siglis, but it's alright since his prototype 72 is much stronger than it. Amila hopes that it's true, as there are more troublesome people than Siglis in Linger. Hiraluk wonders if she is talking about the kidnappers, and he states that he has heard rumors that they don't fight on the battlefield, but they carry the injured away to the rear before anyone realizes it. They minimize their casualties, and Amila states that their boss is a healer who runs around healing people on the spot in the front lines, and she is also a top-notch fighter. That woman holds a deep grudge against her master, and one day she is going to kill her. Hiraluk tells her that she is the commander this time, so she can't go into battle, and Amila states that she knows this, and that's why she is going to send the Black Knight instead. The scene then cuts to Ken sleeping in his bed, and he thinks that he missed this. He then wakes up, and he gives the blue grizzly he saved some fruits. The grizzly eats them, and seeing him eat it so deliciously, Ken also tries one of the fruits, and he thinks that it's good. Ken notices that Kukuru is also there, and he states that he is not going to give any to him, as he tricked him in the forest. Kokoro then makes some puppy dog eyes, and Ken states that he is cute, but he is not going to get tricked again. Kokoro then rubs himself against Ken, and Ken gives in to him, and he gives him some fruits as well. Rose then comes there, and we find out that Ken has named the blue grizzly Blurin. Rose states that she has reported the bear to the king, and they have permission to keep it as property of the rescue team. She tells the bear that he can stay, but he will have to earn his keep, and the bear gets scared seeing the face she is making. Ken wonders what she wants Blurin to do, and the scene cuts to him carrying Blurin. He wonders why he is carrying Blurin, and Rose tells him that this is simulation training. She states that Ken should think of that bear as someone who needs to be rescued, and she asks Ken to start running. Ken then starts to run, and he thinks that this just means that he has more weight to carry. He thinks that it's a breeze if he manages his mana while running, and Rose asks him to pick up the pace, or the wounded soldier isn't going to make it. Ken is then attacked by Tong and Mill on the way, but he dodges, and he asks them what they are doing. They tell him that they are simulating the battlefield for him, and they mention that the others are waiting to ambush him as well, so he should be careful, and Ken goes ahead. After 1 hour he is attacked by Gomel, but he dodges, and after that Alec attacks him with some stinky water, but he manages to dodge this as well. Then 3 hours later, Gid sends some tree trunks his way to run interference, and Ken notices that Kokoro was in on this as well. After some more hours Ken gets tired, and he lies down on the ground. He mentions that he thought that he would be able to manage for half a day, and Rose comes there, and she states that this is the limit of Ken's endurance on the battlefield. She mentions that humans can feel exhaustion from nervousness, fear, and impatience, and this is why Ken ran out of strength faster. Ken wonders what he is supposed to do, and Rose heals him, and she asks him to get used to this. She tells him to acquire fortitude and decisiveness, and don't falter in the face of fear. She then tells him to run around the castle town in the afternoon when his mana is recovered, and she reminds him to not forget to carry Blurin. The scene then cuts to Ken running around the castle town with Blurin, and at first the townspeople are surprised to see a blue grizzly, but they notice that Ken is from the rescue squad, and they calm down. Ken wonders what's going on, and Blurin then smells some delicious fruits, and he takes Ken to a fruit stall. The stall lady asks him if he would like to buy some, but Ken mentions that he doesn't have any money. He asks her why is everyone so calm when he is carrying a monster with him, and the lady mentions that it's because they can tell by his clothes that he is a member of the rescue team, and they see scary-looking men from the rescue team running around town all the time. This is why nothing phases them anymore, and Ken agrees with her thinking that after getting used to their scary faces nothing can scare anyone. He then tells the lady that he will buy some fruit the next time, and he tries to leave, but the lady gives him a fruit for free, and Blurin eats it. Ken then leaves, and a girl named Amako asks the lady if that guy was from the rescue team, and the lady states that he was. Ken then thinks that he should visit the castle to see his friends since he is so close, and a blonde guy notices him. He tries to call out to Ken, but his voice is really soft and Ken can't hear him. He runs after Ken, and Ken finally notices him, but he falls. The scene then cuts to Ken healing the guy, and he wonders if he was trying to get his attention. The guy states that he just wanted to say hello to his new junior, and he introduces himself as Orga Fleur. He mentions that he is one of the rescue team's healers, and Ken tells him about how he was summoned here with the heroes, and about his training. Orga thinks that it's amazing that Ken can keep up with Rose's training, and he mentions that it was impossible for him and his sister. Ken wonders if his sister is the other healer, and Orga mentions that she is, and she is 5 years younger than him. They run a clinic in the city, and they use their healing magic to heal the citizens. Ken wonders why he collapsed earlier if this is the case, and Orga mentions that he is not too good at healing himself. Hearing this, Ken thinks that there are all kinds of healers, and Orga mentions that they are still a part of the rescue team and they work under the captain, and tend to injured soldiers in times of need. This reminds Ken of the upcoming war, and he asks Orga what he does in the battlefield. Orga mentions that Tong and the others bring the injured to him and his sister, and they heal them. Ken then tells him that Rose actually asked him to join her as part of the vanguard, but he doesn't know if he can handle that. Orga informs Ken that in the battle the knight and heroes that fight on the front lines are always in the greatest danger, and normally all they can do is wait when they get injured or left behind, but if there are healers on the battlefield, they can be saved. He mentions that this is an exhausting and dangerous job, but Rose wouldn't choose someone whom she didn't completely trust. Orga then mentions that he needs to get back to the clinic, and Ken thinks that he also has to get back to his practice. Before Ken leaves, Orga asks him to not hate Rose too much, as she is just clumsy with people. Ken tells him that he has never hated her, and he just has a bone or two to pick with her, and he leaves. Orga then thinks that Rose finally managed to find someone, and his sister comes there, and she asks her brother where he was. Orga states that he just met an interesting boy, and his sister asks him who he is talking about. Orga tells his sister Yoruru that she will soon find out for herself, and he is sure that she is going to like him. The scene then cuts to Ken at the castle gates, and he is allowed to enter with the blue grizzly, as Rose has vouched for the monster. Inside, Ken notices a bunch of knights having mock battles, and he notices that Suzune is also training. She also notices Ken, and they sit down to talk. She asks him about the blue grizzly, and Ken tries to tell her about the story of how he met him, but Suzune is mesmerized by Blurin, and she wonders if she can touch him. Ken tells her that she can, as he is super tame, but Blurin doesn't allow her to touch him. Ken is surprised and he states that he is just shy. He then asks Suzune to try calling out his name, and she tries to pet Blurin again by calling out his name, but Blurin bites her. Ken then thinks that maybe Suzune has a tainted soul, and Blurin then bites Ken as well, and Suzune wonders if Ken also has a tainted soul. Suzune then mentions that it seems like it's been ages since she has seen Ken, and Ken notices that Suzune's hands are full of blisters. Suzune tells him that it's the result of her sword training, and Ken heals her hand for her. Suzune then wonders if Ken came here today just to see her, and Ken states that he is here to check on both her and Kazuki. Suzune mentions that honesty is Ken's only flaw, and she tells him that Kazuki is outside the kingdom right now to gain experience by fighting monsters with Siglis and the others. We then see Kazuki, and he asks Siglis if the demon army is really going to attack soon. Siglis mentions that they are, and this time their offensive will be stronger, but they have him, and Suzune with them, so it should be fine. Kazuki states that he will do his best, and they then encounter some hang wolves. Meanwhile, Ken hopes that Kazuki is alright, and Suzune mentions that it's only for a few days, and when he returns it will be her turn to gain some experience. Ken states that he is sure that Suzune is going to have a great time, and Suzune wishes that Ken would worry about her as well. Ken states that he is also worried about her, and after a while he leaves. Suzune then thinks that Ken has become really frank with her, and it's not such a bad feeling. Ken then runs back to the rescue team's house, and he thinks that since his friends are working so hard to prepare for the war, he wants to help them. He doesn't want to hide in safety while they are in danger, and he thinks that back home he could only admire people who could do things that he couldn't, but he is not the same person anymore. At night, Ken notices Rose outside the house, and she asks him if he got used to his training. Ken states that he did, but he would like to train a little longer. Rose tells her to keep going in this case, and Ken mentions that yesterday Rose told him to steal himself. He states that he barely managed to survive the snake monster, so he was terrified when Rose mentioned the demon army. He didn't want to set foot on the battlefield, but today he found a feeling stronger than that fear. He mentions that he can't fight, and he can't kill anyone, but he will still save his friends, and anyone else that he can help, as he is a part of the rescue team. Rose is happy to hear this, and she mentions that saving people is the primary goal of the rescue team. She tells him to keep spouting these ideals, and Ken thinks that this was the first time he felt that he was truly a member of the rescue team. The next day, Rose wakes up Ken, and she mentions that the king sent over a message yesterday, so he is going to accompany Suzune on her training outside of the castle. The scene then cuts to Ken heading to the castle with Rose, and he wonders why he has to join Suzune's training. He states that Kazuki had Siglis with him, and Rose mentions that he was supposed to join his training as well, but Ken had just returned from the forest back then, so she refused. King Lloyd sent her another request yesterday, and she couldn't refuse him twice. Rose states that he should relax, as he will only be there in case they need a healer, and she asks him to play his part for 3 days and come back. Ken understands, and the scene cuts to him at the palace. Suzune is surprised to see that him and Blurin will be joining her, and she wonders if he is going to help her and Blurin bond. Ken states that Blurin is only coming along because he doesn't like anyone else, and Suzune mentions that Ken should learn to play along sometimes. She then introduces her party mates as Iruko the Knight, and Korin the Mage, and Ken thinks that he has seen Iruko before. Haruko mentions that he is the knight who is usually standing at the gate, and Rose then tells Suzune that Ken's healing magic isn't omnipotent. It can heal wounds and cure poisons, but it can't bring people back from the dead. She asks her to not take it for granted, and Suzune understands. Rose then states that Suzune should be able to hold her own, as she was trained by Siglis, and she mentions that she has nothing to say to Ken. She wonders if he is dissatisfied, and Ken mentions that he is fine, as he knows that she doesn't have anything nice to say. Rose then leaves, and Suzune mentions that they should also be off. The scene then cuts to Kazuki doing some sword training, and Celia wonders if it's alright for him to train right now as he was tired after yesterday's training. Kazuki states that he is alright after a good night's rest, and Celia asks him if he is certain. Kazuki mentions that he is really fine, and Celia gets embarrassed knowing that she touched him, and she leaves after telling him to take care of himself. Meanwhile, Suzune tells Ken about how tired Kazuki was after his training, and she mentions that he still said that this was worth it. She states that he battled a ton of monsters in the darkness of Linger, and Ken wonders if Blurin misses his home. Suzune then asks Ken if Blurin is going to wake up soon, and she mentions that he wouldn't mind being petted if he is asleep. Suzune tries to pet him, but Ken stops her, and he asks her what she is doing. Blurin then wakes up, and Ken asks him to walk by himself. Blurin walks by himself, but we see that he is still half asleep, and Suzune offers to carry him thinking that she will get to touch him. Blurin gets on top of her, and she is happy to get to touch him, but she can't handle his weight, and he crushes her. Ken then heals her, and he asks her to not get hurt outside of battle. Corinne then senses some enemies ahead, and some bandits come out of hiding noticing that they have been found. They mention that they were planning on ambushing them, and they ask Ken's group to hand over their valuables. They state that they shouldn't be reckless as they are clearly outnumbered, and Ken thinks that these guys aren't even the least bit intimidating. Suzune is excited to see real-life bandits, and Ken is amazed to see this. The bandits then notice that Ken's group has a blue grizzly with them, and they get scared, but they think that it shouldn't be too much trouble, as it's just a cub. They state that they should capture and skin it, and Suzune then takes out one of the bandits with her thunder magic. Ken asks her to go wild, and he will heal the bandits if she goes too far. Suzune then uses her thunder magic to take out the rest of the bandits as well, and Haruka fights the bandit leader. Corinne then senses something else approaching them fast, and a herd of fall boars come there. Haruka thinks that they are supposed to live deeper into the forest, and Blurin protects Ken from them, but one of the boars manages to hit him when he tries to protect Suzune. This sends the both of them flying, and they both fall into the river. Ken protects Suzune and he notices that this is the same river that he fell into earlier. He thinks that this means that the waterfall is ahead, and he asks Suzune to take a deep breath. The two of them then fall down the waterfall, and the scene cuts to Suzune trying to wake up Ken. She asks him to not give up now, and she states that she is going to repay him for saving her by returning the favor. She states that she is going to get him somewhere safe, and Ken tells her that he is fine. He mentions that she is embarrassing him, and Suzune gets embarrassed to see that he is awake. Ken states that he was just taking a breather after pulling Suzune out of the water, and he heals the scar on her face. Suzune then thanks him, and she apologizes that it had to come to this. Ken asks her to not apologize, and he mentions that he is glad that they got stranded together. He states that he never thought that he would be back here so soon, and he tells Suzune that Rose once dumped him into this forest to train. He states that it's teeming with monsters that put the fall boars to shame, and he notices that they don't have any food. He thinks that he would have liked to have at least one day's worth of food, and Suzune states that they should prioritize escaping this forest if it's as dangerous as Ken says it is. Ken tells her that it's going to get dark soon, and it might even start raining. He mentions that they should find a safe spot to camp for now, and they will find their way back tomorrow. Suzune understands, and she wonders which place would be safe. Ken tells her that the last time he slept on a tree branch, and he wonders if this would be alright with her. Suzune states that she has never climbed a tree, and she mentions that she always wanted to, but she wasn't allowed. Ken wonders if she was born into a rich family that sheltered her, and he mentions that they should camp in that cave in this case. He states that she should get out of her wet clothes before she catches a cold, and Suzune asks him to not peek. Afterwards, Suzune catches some fish by using her thunder magic on the river, and this takes care of their dinner. Suzune then uses her thunder magic to start a fire as well, and Ken thinks that life in the forest is a breeze when he has her around. He then dries off his clothes, and he thinks that he is never going to take fire for granted again. We see that Suzune is sitting alone on the side, as Ken is half naked, and he apologizes for making things awkward for her. Suzune notices that Ken is even more ripped than before, and she then notices some animals in the cave. Ken states that they are venom monkeys, and he mentions that he has read about them. He tells her that they shouldn't be aggressive, but Suzune shouldn't touch them as they are venomous. Suzune still tries to touch them, and she mentions that she doesn't mind being poisoned, as they are irresistible. One of the venom monkeys then bites her, and she gets poisoned. Ken heals her, and meanwhile Siglis informs Kazuki that Ken and Suzune are missing. Kazuki wonders what they mean, and Siglis mentions that they just got word from Corinne's familiar that they got separated from the others. The king states that he hesitated to tell him about this, but Celia was adamant about not keeping any secrets. Kazuki then asks the king if they have dispatched a search party, and the king mentions that the party is being assembled, and they will leave tomorrow. Kazuki states that it would be too late then, and he tries to head to them at once, but Rose stops him. She mentions that his friends are going to be fine. She states that the two of them are most likely together, and she mentions that Ken is her subordinate, so he is not going to die so easily, and if Ken is fine, then Suzune will also be safe. Back in the forest, Ken and Suzune finish eating dinner, and Ken states that surviving in the wilderness is a breeze with Suzune here. Suzune asks him to not treat her as a camping equipment, and Ken states that this is not the case, and he is really grateful to her. He then notices that Suzune is sleepy, and he states that they should take turns sleeping. He mentions that he will keep watch first, but Suzune asks him to sleep first, as he must be tired after using all that healing magic. Ken listens to her, and he lies down. After a while, it starts to rain, and Suzune asks Ken if he is awake. Ken states that he is, and he asks her if there is something on her mind. Suzune then asks him how he feels about being summoned to this world, and she wonders if he wants to go home. Ken states that this is a tough question, and he mentions that he does want to go home, but he also has a reason to stay here. Suzune states that she doesn't want to go back, but Ken says nothing, and she wonders if Ken is not going to ask her why. Ken states that he already has an idea, and he mentions that she prefers this world over their old one. Suzune states that he is right, and she mentions that there is nothing left for her in their old world. She mentions that she is willing to throw away everything including her family and friends, just to stay here, and she states that she has been waiting her whole life for a chance to free herself. She mentions that there is nothing tying her down in this world, and she will trade anything for this freedom. Ken states that this sounds good to him, and Suzune asks him if he is not disappointed by who she really is. Ken mentions that he always wanted to change, and back home, he was tired of his ordinary life and his passive self. He states that the two of them are not that different, and he mentions that when he first arrived in this world, he didn't want to hold his friends back, but now he is determined to protect them, and the people of this kingdom, as a member of the rescue squad. He asks her how she feels, and Suzune states that she also wants to protect this place as a hero. Ken mentions that they should save the people of Linger together, and he states that they should forget their previous world, and protect their here and now. Suzune then mentions that Ken has really grown, and Ken states that she is more relatable to him now. He mentions that back in their old world, he thought that she was a perfect girl, and Suzune mentions that he has been treating his perfect girl rather curtly. She states that she doesn't mind it, as she would rather be close to him than be admired from afar, and this makes Ken embarrassed, and he pretends to go to sleep. The scene then cuts to the two of them trying to regroup with the others, and they notice something in the bushes ahead. They prepare to fight, but they notice that it's just Blurin, and Iruko comes after him, and he collapses due to fatigue. Ken then heals him, and Ikuro mentions that they were searching the forest perimeter for them, but Blurin started to run on his own suddenly, and they followed it thinking that he might lead them to Ken and Suzune. Suzune thinks that Blurin must have picked up Ken's scent, and Blurin then heads to his old home. Suzune wonders what this place is, and Ken tells her that this is Blurin's home. He mentions that Blurin's parents were killed by a giant snake, and Suzune and Iruko are surprised to hear this. They pity Blurin, and Blurin then tries to leave this place. Suzune thinks that he has decided that he belongs by Ken's side, and she tells Ken that they should also head to where they belong. Thanks for watching parts 1 to 5, the rest of the parts will be on my channel. Please like and share the video if you enjoyed it, and make sure to hit the subscribe button, and turn on the notification bell to keep getting new anime recap updates.